So what will be happening is after we get done with this one, where we see how we've taken the simple shapes and we've added detail and we added shading, um, you're going to come up with your own idea. Next week, I will post some story ideas. If you're having a hard time coming up with a 2-page story, if you want to make it up out of your head, I would even be happier because that's really kind of where we need to be with this. I mean, we're building off the bones of an old story and introducing our own stuff, but it would be cool if you could come up with your own panels for the next one. So, over the next couple of weeks or so, I'm going to be introducing you guys to different comic book artists, guys who have influenced me, people who have influenced the industry over the years. And the first one I'm going to start with is probably my favorite, who is John Byrne. And John Byrne started out in the late 70s, and by the early 80s, uh, he was like a rock star in the world of comic book artists. And that really wasn't even a thing back then. I mean, they didn't really have comic book artists per se that were like, oh my God, he's the best. John Byrne in his time period probably was the best. I like this guy's artwork so much, I would daydream in his style of drawing. Um, Unfortunately, I never got to the point where I could draw like him. Once in a while, I'd get close. So, what he would do, or what made John Byrne special, is not only would he draw, but he would usually co plot comic books with whoever the writer was. So, he had his own story wise input. Um, and later on, he would go to write his own comic books and draw them completely. And that way, he would get two checks. He would get a check as a writer. He would get a check as a artist. He also was very outspoken when a lot of people would start to say, you know, it was unfair how the artists had been treated because millions of dollars would be made off their artwork and they'd get a check for like, $1,200 or whatever per month. And that's really hard to live on even back then in New York City. Um, he said that, those artists knew what they were getting into and things hadn't ever changed in the comic book industry since it was started. So a lot of artists got really mad at him. But he did have a point. You take on the job, you do the job, or you say, hey, I want more money, or I'll go someplace else. And so he was kind of firm in his belief of that. This here is a picture of Thanos and the Avengers as would be done, and the original Captain Marvel, not the Brie Larson one, but the dude, um, as would be done in the style of John Byrne, the way comic book characters look in the comic book, which are different from the comic books in the movie. Not only was he amazing at drawing human figures and doing foreshortening like we see here, um, but he was incredible with these meticulous backgrounds. Anything that was geometric, whoops, sorry, anything that was geometric just seemed to flow out of him like second nature. And I think as a comic book artist, you got to love the process of drawing comic books to really do it. We play with it in our class. And a lot of times we play with it because we don't have a lot in the way of supplies. So it's easier for you guys to learn like the concepts of art doing comic book characters than it is trying to paint without paint. you know, the district has managed to make it difficult for us this year. They really have. Okay, going back to John Byrne. John Byrne's the guy that made Wolverine possible or popular. While he wasn't the guy who created Wolverine, his input on those early X-Men Wolverine issues gave Wolverine a personality. And John Byrne, being from Canada, felt very much, you know, in link with Wolverine. He was like, you know what, I'm a Canadian. They made Wolverine a Canadian. Um, that small link alone made him really favor him as a character. And he did things that were not common in the comic book at that time. Like Wolverine had claws. Before the early 80s, they would have shown pictures of him fighting with claws. but they wouldn't have showed him killing anybody. And the comic code started to kind of dissolve in the early 80s. And by the end of the 80s, it hardly was used on books, because so many books were being sold in comic stores and not out in regular everyday where kids could get a hold of them. But Wolverine really has no other ability other than these sharp claws. And if you're going to attack anybody with sharp claws, people are going to get hurt. So he didn't become one of those characters where, like, Superman has superpowers, but he always lightly taps people that he wants to punch, so he doesn't take their heads off. Um, Wolverine never really compensated, and I think that's part of the reason they liked him as a fan character. They also started building at that time period Wolverine being much older than he looks, saying stuff that he was probably around in the Revolutionary War, possibly the Civil War. The bones or the claws on his glove actually became in his arm, which the original creator of Wolverine never had thought about. There were things that John Byrne wanted to do with Wolverine that he couldn't do with Wolverine. He wanted to make Wolverine even more vicious of a character. He said Wolverine, he always thought, would be a character who could be sitting there eating breakfast and somebody that he knew and liked could come in and just say something to him like hello, good morning, even something with sarcasm, and Wolverine would kill them and then go back to eating cereal. He really wanted Wolverine to be like a wild animal. You know, a bear will lose its mind. All, like, even people who've trained bears have said, you know, you could hit them in the head with 2x4 and they'd be fine. But a snowball, you hand them a snowball and it breaks, and then they turn into a berserk rage. Animals like get set off from stuff that we don't understand. And that's really how John Byrne wanted to write Wolverine. And they're like, no, we get it. He's an anti hero. You're not doing that. With that said, the way John Byrne draws Wolverine is kind of the seminal version of Wolverine. It's what we expect. It's what you see a lot of. Anytime they talk about the history of the X-Men, the 50% of the drawings are John Byrne drawings of Wolverine. There's a point there where they made his costume browns because yellow never made any sense. I really do think Wolverine has the worst costume for his character in the history of comic books, because Wolverines are not yellow. Um, and after his time at the X-Men, whenever there was a failing comic book at Marvel, they would put John Byrne on it for a couple of years. So Captain America was in fear of being canceled. They put John Byrne on him for a year. People started collecting it again. Boom. They moved John Byrne to another comic that was failing, which I believe at that point was the Incredible Hulk. At one point, he got to do his own Canadian-based superhero team called Alpha Flight. You have not yet seen that in the Marvel movies, but I'm sure it's going to happen at some point. In that team, you had the Vindicator, which was basically Captain Canada. He had a big Canadian leaf on him. You had the Sasquatch, which was a person who could turn into this big monster. It was a Sasquatch. You had this little tough midget brawler named Puck. It was kind of like the fisty version of Wolverine. Shaman, and North Star and Aurora, and Snowbird. Now, that team changed a lot over the years because nobody but John Byrne really knew what to do with them. So, if they make the movie, I hope they stick with the first couple of issues. Another thing that John Byrne did was he had a long run on the She-Hulk, which you will be seeing probably in the next year on Disney Plus, if you subscribe to that. She-Hulk was one of the first characters that would break the fourth wall, even before Deadpool would. So she would step from one place to another, breaking panel. She would tear out of a page to talk to somebody, which I always thought was pretty cool. She really knew she was in a comic book. And you would see it because she goes, "This is your second chance. If you don't buy my book this time, I'm going to come to your house and rip up all your X-Men. So even John Byrne knew how popular he had been on the X-Men and worked that into his She-Hulk cover. Do you see a lot of John Byrne comics anymore? No. He's been doing this for 45 years and he is in semi-retirement. So if you have a lot of money, you can contact him and he will draw for you whatever you want. If you want a comic where DC fights Marvel characters, Batman fights Captain America, She-Hulk fights Wonder Woman, Superman fights the Hulk, Shazam fights Thor, yeah, you pay him, he'll do it. And that's what he does in his spare time now. He likes to draw. He just doesn't want to do a comic book anymore. So if I ever win the lottery, I will call him and hopefully he will take my novel and turn it into a comic book and I will pay him gobs of money. At least that's my hope. Interesting thing about John Byrne, completely colorblind. So what you're looking at right now in this page is how he sees the world in black and white. He probably colored this one, but he had to read the names on the colors to do the colors because he can't see the difference between light blue and skin tone. He just can't. He wasn't born with those cones in his eyes. So now, why am I showing you this history of John Byrne here? I'm giving you this quick history of John Byrne because as you are going forth and you are going to be doing your own original comic with your own layouts, you might want to look up artists, check out their work. If you like something from their work, borrow some of it. I learned to draw mouths by looking at John Byrne comic books. At least my comic mouths, I learned to draw that way. So there is my little John Byrne presentation. All right, quick talk about what we're doing with the comic pages. I'll give you a little update. All right, once again, I built this page off the layouts from the layouts that we did in class. Got my character Traven. This has a little more, I think, than the last time you saw it. I added a boom here, which makes him flying off, his head turning to figure out what blew up in the mall. So while there's only really 2 word bubbles in here, this scene makes sense. So if you end up only needing 2 word bubbles and it doesn't feel empty and the sound effect, you could pull off something like that. All right. Remember, you built over the simple shapes of your original, so you should be adding details and such. Let's see. Let me go this way real quick. Okay, so like I said, I was working on the drawings first so I could figure out what these 2 are saying to each other, because usually as I draw, I daydream, and I daydream about the things that I'm drawing, and I start playing out that story in my head. So as I watch him pushing past the keeper of the gateway, I start with I'm leaving. I don't know what to add yet from here, but I'm not done drawing. Then I added in, this was not part of our deal. Our business is done. He'll probably say something like, all right, but before you go, there's something you should see. Now I'm going to leave that scene on a cliffhanger. If I don't need this word bubble, I will erase it and draw on the rest of his body. So there's that. I've still got another word bubble I feel I need to add here, but it's awkward at this point where it's going to go. So here's my other scene. I switched up the characters. The Keeper of Time became the lead character. Had to make him skinnier. He's coming in yelling, where is she? Thunder says to him, I don't know what you said to her, but she's not a child. She's old enough to make her own mistakes. He's going to say something back. I don't know what yet. And I'm not sure if the word bubble is going to be here or the word bubble is going to be over here. All right. But she finishes up, by the way, the next time I talk to you, take off the mask. All right. So your story doesn't have to be 100% in this one page. You can leave it on a cliffhanger, but it should at least make some kind of sense. All right. All right, cool. So Put your name in the chat. Make sure that you're alive out there. I have proof of life that you're living. And so when I do attendance, I don't accidentally mess you up. All right. You've got the rest of the class period to work on this. So we're out at 10:05. You got a good strong 26 minutes. So finish that up, man. I need to see details, word bubbles, and shading. All right. That's it.